Who has heard of expressive individualism? I've been hearing more about it recently. Now, I heard it a while back when I took a class with Carl Trueman. I was fortunate enough to take a class through RTS with Carl Trueman on sexuality and identity, right? And he talked about this in that class, and we got the opportunity to discuss with him. Well, then later he writes a book. Later, Trueman writes a book. Here's the book: The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, Cultural Amnesia, Expressive Individualism, and the Road to Sexual Revolution. So then Trueman writes this book, and I'm like, I gotta pick it up. And of course I pick it up and I blaze through it, and it has a lot of ideas from the class we were in. And I was like, this is amazing. Well, then I'm listening to Ben Shapiro and I'm listening to Andrew Klavan, and both of them quote Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And you know what I'm like? I got to take a class with him. I met him in real life. I asked him a question in class. Yes. Oh man, it was super hype. But in all seriousness, guys, expressive individualism is one of the most important topics that we can be discussing right now in the church. Expressive individualism permeates our culture, it permeates our society, and it causes us to think and mull over ideas in our heads in ways that we're not even aware of. We are so infected by the ideas behind expressive individualism that we're not even aware of it. And so what I want to do tonight is to go into the topic of expressive individualism and give you a little bit of a taste of what it's like, especially out there in the popular culture with what people are reading. Now, I read a book that I think is literally the anthem for expressive individualism. There could almost be no better book on the topic. This book is called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Okay? Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I was blown away when I read this book, guys. This book is incredible at capturing the spirit of expressive individualism. Glennon Doyle perfectly exemplifies the expressive individualist. And so it's no wonder that her book became a New York Times bestseller, #1, and it has just caught fire. And so I read this book, and I took so many bookmarks, it was insane. Look at my bookmarks, guys. Look at my bookmarks for Glennon Doyle's Untamed. Hold on, we're going too slow. Look at all of my bookmarks. It's insane. Why did I bookmark it so much? Because it's so good. It's so good at capturing the heartbeat of expressive individualism. This book, if you want to know what expressive individualism is, if you want to know how people think, this is the book. This book uncovers it perfectly. Not only that, she's a top-notch writer. She's clear as day. And you can't help but get caught up in the stories she tells. She's so good. And that's the challenge of interacting with this book. How strong it is in this way. Okay? So that's what we're going into tonight. I took so many bookmarks, I can't cover this in one video. So we'll break it up into multiple topics. Okay? We're going to break it up into multiple topics. She talks about all sorts of stuff. She talks about expressive individualism tied to internal knowing, expressive individualism tied to society and culture. She talks about parenting. I love her advice on parenting, honestly. She talks about narrative and how it impacts us deeply. She, of course, talks about LGBT issues. She talks about differences in personality. She talks about feeling different energies and all these other things. Okay? So, we're going to be talking about a lot of the stuff from Glennon Doyle's book. Now, I want you guys to know, it sounds like I'm sitting here praising the book. I am, for the insight that it lends. But I want you to know that if you're going to dig into the book, she is speaking from somebody who is self-proclaimedly embracing expressive individualism to its core and living it out. Okay? So let's start with this. Who is Glennon Doyle? Glennon Doyle was a pretty famous Christian writer, and she was trying to live her life as a good Christian wife. And then her husband cheated on her, and she was heartbroken. And she was still wrestling with the idea of trying to stay with her husband. And then she went to a book fair, a book club, where she was going to speak, and she met a woman named Abby, who is an ex-United States soccer player, and I believe of top-notch world-level caliber. And she fell in love with Abby. So, Glennon Doyle divorced her husband, married Abby, and the book is written in this context, where she has divorced her husband, she has married another woman, and they have now tried to raise the kids from her and her husband. Her husband's name is Craig. And so they have kind of a weird family setup, where you have Glennon and Abby together, the two moms, if you will, and then you also have Craig, who is the dad, and he's been divorced by Glennon. And so much of her story is, again, permeated by expressive individualism. It's just full of the stuff. And so I want us to walk through the ideas so that you guys can have a better sense of what's going on. And what I've done, guys, her book, like I said, has so many bookmarks. I've broken up her book into the chapters that I think are most relevant. Okay? So tonight we're going to cover 8 chapters or so, and we won't read the full chapters, but we're going to get an idea of the chapters. Okay? And I'll set up each one. And I've broken them up into the categories they cover. So tonight is essentially part 1 of a 2-part series, because her 2 biggest themes I'm going to cover first: internal knowing, expressive individualism, and society and culture, expressive individualism. Then after we cover those, we might do some other lessons or studies on her different topics. Zimmy asked a very prescient question: who first coined the term expressive individualism? Like I said, it's a very popular term now. It comes from Charles Taylor, okay? Charles Taylor is a philosopher who talks about, how the culture is impacted by ideas, okay? And Charles Taylor started talking about these ideas of expressive individualism. He says it's the spirit of our culture, it's the spirit of our age, and the way that Truman puts it at the beginning and end of the book is we're all expressive individualists now. Let's go ahead and read this little section by Truman and see what he says about expressive individualism so we can get a better understanding. Indeed, in characterizing the modern age as that of psychological man, that's who we are, we're psychological man right now, Reef makes a point very similar to that of Charles Taylor in his understanding of the human self. Psychological categories and an inward focus are the hallmarks of being a modern person. Inward focus, guys. That is what Taylor refers to as expressive individualism. Each of us finds our meaning by giving expression to our feelings and desires. So what does this mean? It means you have certain feelings and desires. These things are internal to you. They make up who you are on the inside. And then what you do is you express those desires outwardly, okay? And this is how you find meaning. Your meaning is bound up not in just who you are on the inside, but your ability to express outwardly who you are on the inside. That's what gives you meaning and purpose. For Taylor, this kind of self exists in what he describes as a culture of authenticity. Okay? So if you wanted to define expressive individualism in a simple term, it's authenticity. How often have you ever been interacting with somebody or talking with somebody and you mentioned another person, they said, yeah, they're really authentic, right? They almost always mean it as a compliment, right? Or somebody will say that about you. Oh, you're very authentic, or I sense that you have a lot of authenticity. That is almost always meant as a compliment. Why? Because we are an expressive, individualistic culture. We have feelings and emotions on the inside, and we want to express those outwardly. Here's a quote from Taylor. The understanding of life, which emerges with the romantic expressivism of the late 18th century, that each of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity, and that it is important to find and live out one's own, as against surrendering to conformity with a model imposed on us from the outside by society or the previous generation or religious or political authority. End quote. Here's the idea. You're born into a culture and society, and the society is going to try and shape and mold you into the image and likeness that it wants you to be. But that is going against who you are on the inside. It's going against authenticity. It's going against expressive individualism. So what needs to happen? You need to resist the forces that are imposing themselves on you to conform you and shape you and mold you into the image that the society or institutions that we live in want you to have. Okay? That is your role. That is what you are supposed to do. And this is why a lot of people are rejecting traditional institutions and ideals. Okay? This shift to psychological man and to expressive individualism is far-reaching in its implications, as I argue in future chapters. Taylor, for example, rightly sees it as underpinning the consumer revolution that took place after the Second World War. At this point, it is simply worth noting that it involves a very different way of thinking about and relating to the world around us. We had this change in society and culture, and so many of the issues that we have now in society and culture are an outworking of this expressive individualism, okay? This is the way the vast majority of us think and feel and act in the world, okay? And you may want to go against that idea, but I have a quote from Truman Now, and I want you to hear this quote. He puts it in the beginning of the book and the end of the book. A lot of us like to think we're not expressive individualists. We like to point out others. They're expressive individualists and they're the problem. But what Truman notes is that's not the case. Listen to what he says. There is a tendency among social conservatives to blame expressive individualism for the problems that they regard as currently putting a strain on liberal Western order, particularly as it manifests itself in the chaos of identity politics. The difficulty with this claim is that expressive individualism is something that affects us all. It is the very essence of the culture of which we are all part. To put it bluntly, we are all expressive individuals now. End quote. Now that's Truman. Truman is a very Christian, orthodox author. And yet he says, try as you might, you can't buck society's impact on you, that you are expressive individualist in your own way. Okay? Again, ask yourself this question. Does the word authenticity resonate with you? Do you like that word? If somebody were to be authentic with you, would you think that was a good thing? If so, you've been affected by expressive individualism. So I'm going to lay my cards on the table at the outset. Okay? I don't think the answer is they're an expressive individualist. That's what's wrong with them. They're bad. I think society and culture has moved too far. I think instead the answer is, how can we promote Christianity amidst a society that has been captivated by expressive individualism? I think that's the question we need to be asking, okay? We need to do this in a Christian way. And as we're going to see when we listen to Glennon Doyle, expressive individualism is something that is causing great social ills and problems in our society right now. That's the tension we're wrestling with. I see the damage that expressive individualism does, So I have a tendency to want to reject it. But society has so much embraced this idea that I don't know that we can just jettison it. We could throw up the walls and start firing the guns at expressive individualism, and that might work. But I have a fear that it won't because of the societal shift from Enlightenment rationalism down through postmodernism into where we are now. I feel like expressive individualism is part of the air we breathe. So you could throw up the walls and start shooting the guns, or you could ask yourself, how can we deliver the gospel of Christ in an expressive individualistic society? That is something that we need to be pursuing, I think. And I'm not opposed to both. If somebody wants to throw up the walls and fire the guns, I think I'm okay with that, right? But my approach is going to be to say, okay, I agree with Truman. We're all expressive individuals now. What do we do about it? That's my follow-up question. Okay? So that's the background I wanted everyone to have. Now that we have that background, let's dig into Glennon Doyle. Okay? Now, Glennon Doyle has the book she wrote, Untamed. She has several chapters on the ideas behind expressive individualism. Okay? And what I want to do now is I want to walk through the chapters, and I'm going to pause when I have thoughts, and then I'm going to kind of interact with Glennon Doyle as we're working through this. That's my plan, at least. Now, here's what I want to say when it comes to Glennon Doyle. There are two broad themes of her book, and these capture the heartbeat of expressive individualism as it is put forth out in the society and the world. Okay? Two broad themes. The first theme is inward knowing. That's how I'm going to put it. The first theme is inward knowing, and that's what tonight's lesson is going to be focused on. The inward knowing. The inward knowing half of expressive individualism is to look into yourself, look deep into your heart, into your feelings and emotions and desires, discover who you are on the inside. Okay? That is the first half of expressive individualism. Look into your heart, into the inside, have this inward knowing where you're sure of yourself, and then you're going to express that outwardly. But that's only half of the equation. That's only half of what makes expressive individualism work. There's another half to this. The other half is that society makes boxes or structures or rules for you to follow. And your role, your job is to buck the societal pressure that you are faced with. Okay? So society wants to fit you into a box. Society has developed a way of imagining or viewing who you are, and you are expected to fill in that role. Okay? She says you should buck society's rules for you. You should put them off. These don't identify me. I don't care what society tells me. I don't care what religion tells me. I don't care what the government tells me. I don't care what anyone tells me. I'm going to buck the societal trends. I don't have time to go into both tonight. So tonight we're just going to go into the first half, the inward knowing, and then in a future study, we're going to go into the second half, bucking society's trends. Okay? Now, she opens the prologue with probably the most fitting descriptor of expressive individualism. Okay? And it's the cheetah illustration. The cheetah illustration is as follows. She took her kids to the zoo, and there was a cheetah in the zoo. And that cheetah's name was Tabitha. And Tabitha had been born in the zoo. It's not as though they went out into the wild and captured her and brought her into the zoo, but instead Tabitha was born in the zoo. And because Tabitha was born in the zoo, she didn't know what it was like to be a free cheetah. She's been stuck behind these cages, behind these fences, behind these walls. And yet, as Tabitha surveys the fence line, Tabitha dreams about what it would be like to be a real free cheetah. This becomes the operative illustration for expressive individualism. You are a cheetah, says Glennon. You are a cheetah. You've been born into captivity, into this fence-like structure in society. You're trapped, and you want to break out of this mold. You're a cheetah, and you need to break out of the zoo that you've been born into so that you can be free. That's her operative illustration. And this is tied to inward knowing. You look inward and you know that you're a cheetah. And then this is tied to bucking society's trends. These fences aren't going to hold me in. I'm going to break out. I'm going to break free. And I'm going to explore the wild like the cheetah I really am. Okay? That is her operative illustration. I'm not going to have us listen to that specific part because I just described it pretty well. But she tells it in a very emotive and illustrative way, and you're like, yeah, that's right, I am a cheetah. I got to break out of the system. But this informs all of the narrative ideas that follow, okay? This informs all of it as she kind of proceeds forward, all right? So, this cheetah metaphor is the inward knowing, the expressive individualism. Now, I want to start with 2 chapters that talk about how can you know yourself inwardly? What should you do? And she has 2 chapters that are really focused on this idea. The chapter titled Know and the chapter titled Temperatures, okay? And so I want to look at each one, and she talks about, illustrates what it is like to know inwardly. I want to start with Temperatures, because Temperatures is a little bit shorter, and it sort of kind of defines this inward knowing idea. So let me find Temperatures.
Temperatures. One morning, I called my friend Martha and began telling her all the reasons I could not leave my marriage. Then I began sharing all the reasons I could not stay in my marriage. I kept talking, weighing every angle, arguing myself into corners and then around and round in circles. Eventually, she said, Glennon, stop. You are in your head. The answers you need this time aren't in there. They're in your body.
So this is one initial idea, okay, guys? And this fits in, if you guys remember some of our discussions surrounding Ian McGilchrist, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, okay? She's trying to think her way to her conclusion, right? She's using the left hemisphere. Okay, here are all the arguments for leaving my marriage. Here are all the arguments against leaving my marriage. I'm not sure which one to go with. And what her friend says is, stop thinking your way there. Stop using the left hemisphere. Instead, feel your way there. Use your right hemisphere. And that's more of the direction our society is leaning coming out of this postmodern environment, okay?
Try dropping into your body. Right now, on the phone. Drop lower. This is becoming a theme in my life, all this sinking and dropping. She asked, You in there yet? I think so, I said. Okay, now consider both decisions. Inhabit yourself and feel. Does saying goodbye to Abby feel warm to you? No. That feels cold, actually. It feels icy. It makes me feel like I'll die of cold. Now consider being with Abby. How does that feel? It feels warm, soft, spacious. Okay, Glennon, your body is nature, and nature is pure. I know that's hard for you to accept because you've been at war with your body for so long. You think your body is bad, but it's not. It's wise. Your body will tell you things your mind will talk you out of. Your body is telling you what direction life is in. Try trusting it. Turn away from what feels cold. Go toward what feels warm.
Okay, so do you hear that difference? We have a look into yourself. This is the expressive individualist Stop thinking. You're stuck in your head. Get out of your head and look down into your heart. Feel your way. What feels warm? What feels cold? Move towards the warmth. Move away from the cold. Okay? This is authenticity. Your body is nature. It knows what is right. Get out of your head. Stop thinking your way to your conclusions. Instead, feel your way to your conclusions. What feels warm? What feels cold? This is the idea. And again, it's expressive individualism at its core, right? Again, directed by the right hemisphere. And you guys know I'm a fan of the right hemisphere, but this is part of the way it's being leveraged in our society and culture today.
Now, when I sense danger, I believe the cold and leave. When I sense joy, I believe the warm and stay. These days in business meetings, when I request an explanation for a decision someone has made, the women on my team know that I'm not looking for justifications, judgments, or opinions. I'm looking for knowing. So the decision maker will say, I did the research and sat with these options for a while. This option felt warm to me. The alternative felt cold. That will be the end of the discussion. I trust women who trust themselves.
Okay, that's the end of the chapter. So again, you hear that. She's running a business. She runs several organizations, nonprofits, and, different organizations like that. And when conducting business, what does she essentially lean into? Intuition, right? I don't require explanations from my direct reports. I don't require them to justify their decisions in an intellectual left hemisphere way. All I require them to do is tell me, does it feel warm? Does it feel cold? If it feels cold, we don't do it. If it feels warm, we do it. This is a response to our overly scientific way of viewing the world today. A lot of people have a left hemisphere scientism approach to world. And a postmodern culture has decided that that is cold and dead and rotten. And we are not going to lean into a scientific, rationalistic, left hemisphere way of living. And so we're going to lean into the right hemisphere. But what is the right hemisphere all about? It's about intuition. We're not going to justify our decisions. We're going to make the decision that feels warm and not the decision that feels cold. Okay? It is an unabashed, unashamed leaning into that. You see, a lot of people make decisions on intuition, but they feel the need in our left hemisphere society to make those intuitive decisions into logical propositions. So a lot of people will intuit an idea, and then after they intuit an idea, they will try to give justifications or rationalizations for it because that's required of them. And then hopefully their justifications make sense to people and they can move forward. But they really arrive at the idea through intuition itself. Glennon is saying, let's get rid of that second part. We don't need to make justifications for our decisions. Again, if you guys will remember our discussion on the left and right hemispheres of the brain, the way the brain is supposed to work is a right, left, right handoff. The right hemisphere perceives a large concept or idea, intuition, then it hands it off to the left hemisphere so that the left hemisphere can parse it and make judgments and analysis. And then the left hemisphere is supposed to hand it back off to the right hemisphere so that the right hemisphere can present it. Okay? What Glennon is encouraging here is the right hemisphere perceives and intuits an idea, and we should never hand it off to the left hemisphere. That's what she's saying. Don't worry about your justifications. Tell me what your right hemisphere tells you. Now, the right hemisphere can be helpful, but the way the brain works is a right, left, right handoff is helpful. And Glennon is recommending we never hand off our intuitions to the left. Right, it doesn't go right, left, right for Glennon. It just goes right, right. That's it. Okay? So this warm and cold idea is kind of the first step to expressive individualism. This is tied to this internal knowing that she has. I know things internally, and then I'm going to lean into the knowing, right? That's her idea. The next chapter that I want us to cover is called Know. So it's this, she refers constantly to this internal knowing. How can I know, right? And this internal knowing, she actually goes through a meditation process to find this internal knowing, okay? So I want to go to the chapter called Know, because this essentially sets the framework for, it's so important. This chapter is so important to her methodology because it sets the framework for how she does the warm and cold thing, okay? This is how she can discern the warm and cold thing properly for herself, all right? It's this concept that she calls Know.
If there is, in fact, an objective right or wrong way to handle this, why do all of these people have such different ideas about what a person should do? I had an epiphany. It must be that should and shouldn't, right and wrong, good and bad, they're not wild. They're not real. They're just culturally constructed, artificial, ever-changing cages created to maintain institutions.
This is that second theme I told you about, guys, where the institutions are the problem. Again, society and culture imposes itself on you. It tries to fit you in a box. And if you aren't if you're embracing the box that society and culture fits you into, then that's the problem. And we need to buck that trend. This is where she starts talking about her process of how she knows, okay? This internal knowing, this internal sense, all right? And it's so funny because the way she gets to this idea is through a Bible verse taken out of context, which I think is very interesting. So listen to what she has to say. This is how she gets to her process of this internal knowing. Again, expressive individualism. I first have to figure out what's going on the inside, who I am, what I believe, what I feel.
I decided that if I kept doing the right thing, I would spend my life following someone else's directions instead of my own. I didn't want to live my life without living my life. I wanted to make my own decision as a free woman from my soul, not my training. But the problem was, I didn't know how. A few weeks later, I opened a card from a friend that said, in bold, capital, thick black lettering, "Be still and know." I'd read that verse many times before, but it struck me freshly this time. It didn't say, poll your friends and know, or read books by experts and know, or scour the internet and know. It suggested a different approach to knowing. Just stop.
Be still and know by stopping. Let's go ahead and look that verse up real quick, guys. Let's go ahead and see what that verse has to say, because that's not how I remember it. That's not how I remember that verse. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. It's not even a full verse, guys. It's a third of a verse. Be still and know that I am God, completely cut off. Listen to what she has to say. She is just taking the concept of be still and know and turning it into, oh, here's how I know, by just being still. Listen.
Stop moving, stop talking, stop searching, stop panicking, stop flailing. If you just stop doing, you'll start knowing. This seemed like magical nonsense, but desperate women take desperate measures. I decided to experiment. After the kids left for school, I shut myself in the closet, sat down on a towel, closed my eyes, and did nothing but breathe. At first, each 10-minute session felt 10 hours long. I checked my phone every few moments. I planned my grocery lists and mentally redecorated my living room. The only things I seemed to know on that floor were that I was hungry and itchy and suddenly desperate to fold laundry and reorganize my pantry. I was an input junkie thrown into detox. I was tempted.
Now, there's a piece of truth in this. We, in our society and culture today, are constantly bombarding ourselves with stimuli. And so consequently, we don't have a lot of time to be still. So it is important for us to be still. That's actually important, to unplug, to disengage, okay? And we're supposed to do that in prayer. That's the Christian practice, right? Where we be still, we calm down, we sit, we're with the Lord, we unplug, etc. These are good practices to engage in, okay? But notice that the input she's removing is not a technology input. The input she's removing is the input of, again, society and culture telling you how you should live. Instead, I'm just going to be still and know. That's where my knowing is going to come from. So again, let's continue.
Tempted to quit every second, but I was stern with myself. 10 minutes a day is not too long to spend finding yourself, Glennon. For God's sake, you spend 80 minutes a day finding your keys. After a few weeks, like a gymnast who is able to stretch deeper after each training, I began to feel myself dropping lower during each closet session. Eventually, I sank deep enough to find a new level inside me that I'd never known existed. This place is underneath, low, deep, quiet, still. There are no voices there, not even my own. All I can hear down there is my breath. It was as though I'd been drowning, and in my panic, I had been gasping for air, calling for rescue, and flailing on the surface. But what I really needed to do to save myself was let myself sink. It struck me that this is why we say to people, calm down, because beneath the noise of the pounding, swirling surf is a place where all is quiet and clear. Since the chaos stills in this deep, I could sense something there I was not able to sense on the surface. It was like that silent chamber in Denmark, one of the quietest places in the world, where people can actually hear and feel their own blood circulating. There in the deep, I could sense something circulating inside me. It was a knowing. I can know things down at this level that I can't on the chaotic surface. Down here, when I pose a question about my life in words or abstract images, I sense a nudge. The nudge guides me toward the next precise thing. And then, when I silently acknowledge the nudge, it fills me. The knowing feels like warm liquid gold filling my veins and solidifying just enough to make me feel steady, certain. What I learned, even though I'm afraid to say it, is that God lives in this deepness inside me. When I recognize God's presence and guidance, God celebrates by flooding me with warm, liquid gold.
Okay, there you go. So, all systems of thought, ideas, etc., need a framework through which to live out in the world. And here, Glennon has identified God. God for her is when she gets quiet, gets silent, sinks, and then feels a nudge, silently acknowledges the nudge, and then feels like she is filled with warm liquid gold. That tells her what the next precise thing is. So notice now, the framework to help you decide how you should live your life out in the world is found internally. It is self-containing. You can look into yourself, down into yourself, and by getting quiet, getting silent, and acknowledging this nudge, you can have that direction for your life. For Christianity, we hang our ethical, moral, and activities hat on the Bible, the Word of God. Here's what the Bible says. It explicitly tells us to do X, Y, Z, and we're going to live in alignment with that. But for expressive individualism, we're going to hang that hat on the next precise thing as defined by looking into myself and acknowledging a nudge. That is the difference. And now we have that framework. So remember the operative illustration. You're a cheetah. You've been born into a society that tries to conform you to its box, and then you need to break out of society's box, and in order to do that, you need to know inwardly yourself, acknowledge the nudge, do the next precise thing, trust the warm, turn from the cold. all of these ideas. This is how you act out expressive individualism in your life, okay? These 2 chapters kind of talk about her operative mode of being, okay? Now that we've examined that, I want to start digging into those chapters where she just begins to discuss examples of this expressive individualism in her life. All right, let's do gatherings next. And what this one is a situation where some boys and girls came over to her house and she asked them, do you guys want something to eat? And she noticed that the girls' response was very different than the boys' response. Okay, that's what happened here. So let me skip forward.
Gather of the older girl, other girls. Each looks to a friend at me and half smiles. Hi, Mom. I need an excuse to be there, so I ask, anybody hungry? What comes next seems to unfold in slow motion. Every single boy keeps his eyes on the TV and says, yes. The girls are silent at first. Then each girl diverts her eyes from the television screen and scans the faces of the other girls. Each looks to a friend's face to discover if she herself is hungry. Some kind of telepathy is happening among them. They are polling. They are researching. They are gathering consensus, permission, or denial. Somehow, the collective silently appoints a French-braided, freckle-nosed spokesgirl. She looks away from the faces of her friends and over at me. She smiles politely and says, "We're fine, thank you." The boys looked inside themselves. The girls looked outside themselves. We forgot how to know when we learned how to please.
This is one of the problems that women face in our society and culture today, according to Glennon Doyle. You see, when asked a question, boys look inside themselves to discover what they desire. Are you hungry? Simple question. A boy looks inside himself and decides, am I hungry or not? Yeah, I'm hungry. Of course. Make some food. We'll eat it. Right? However, the girls have a completely different reaction to the situation. They all look at each other. Are we hungry? They ask implicitly with their eyes, I don't know if we're hungry. Should we be hungry? And they're all kind of deciding, because of people pleasing, they're deciding if they're hungry collectively. And without speaking any words, one of the girls gets the hint, speaks up and says, no, we're fine. Thank you very much. Okay? What is going on here? For Glennon, this is an example of boys kept their knowing, what we just talked about. They looked inwardly. Boys are good expressive individualists. They looked inward, I'm hungry, and then they said it expressively. Women, however, have a really big problem being expressive individualists. Why? Because they learned to be people pleasers. They learned to shape and fit and mold themselves to what society tells them to do. And because that's implicitly wrong or bad, instead, they're not being expressive individuals, and they forgot how to know. They're not sinking. They're not feeling. They're not going towards the next precise thing. They're not sensing the nudge, and therefore they're not being filled with the warm liquid gold. That's the idea, okay? And so, for her, this is the box that women especially need to break out of. Society has imposed this box upon women. They need to break out of it. Let's go to Dragons. Dragons is, again, the same principle. But here's where she talks about her past and some of the struggles she had. Okay? And I do want you guys to know, I should have told you this earlier, but she sometimes uses curse words. So this is not necessarily a family-friendly stream. So I want you to know here, Dragon, she's wrestling with her inner struggle, her inner turmoil, right? She feels like she's supposed to be something because society has put her in this box, and she's trying to break out of that, right? And just so you know, she did struggle with substance abuse and things like that in her past. So she's kind of wrestling with those ideas as well.
My friend Megan is 5 years sober now after a decade of alcohol and drug abuse. Lately, she's been trying to figure out what happened to her, how addiction had taken over the life of such a strong woman. On Megan's wedding day, she sat in the back of the chapel knowing she didn't want to marry the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle. She knew it from her roots. She married him anyway because she was 35 years old, and getting married was what she was supposed to do. She married him anyway because there were so many people she would have disappointed if she had called it off. There was only one of her, so she disappointed herself instead. She said, "I do," while her inside said, "I don't."
And again, this is the heartbeat of Glennon Doyle's program of expressive individualism. The bad thing is to say no to yourself in order to say yes to others. You should never be doing that for Glennon.
And then she spent the next decade trying not to know what she knew, that she had betrayed herself and that her life would not really begin until she stopped betraying herself. The only way not to know was to get wasted and stay that way. So she started drinking heavily during her honeymoon. The drunker she became, the more distance she felt from the dragon inside her. After a while, the booze and drugs became her problem, which was convenient because she didn't have to deal with her real problem anymore. We're like snow globes. We spend all of our time, energy, words, and money creating a flurry, trying not to know, making sure that the snow doesn't settle, so we never have to face the fiery truth inside us.
Now, again, she's onto something here, right? What she's talking about is the fact that we self-medicate, okay? We self-medicate as human beings, trying to fill ourselves with stuff to make ourselves feel better, or at least numb ourselves to the pain of existence, of life, etc. But for her, notice the differences here. In the Christian frame, you're numbing yourself to the fact that you are not truly happy or satisfied or don't feel gratification in life because you are not oriented towards God properly. That's the Christian frame. Your orientations are out of whack, and because your orientation isn't towards God properly, this is why you feel all of these ways. And then we self-medicate because we don't want to turn to God. For Glennon, your self-medication comes about because you've denied yourself. You've denied the inward nudge. Remember, all of the behavioralistic framework that Christians use is found in the Word. For Glennon, it's found internally. We look for that nudge, and then we lean into the next precise thing. And so that, for her, is why we're self-medicating. We're self-medicating because we have denied ourselves. We have not actually lived expressively according to the individualism that we feel.
Solid and unmoving. The relationship is over. The wine is winning. The pills aren't for back pain anymore. He's never coming back. That book won't write itself. The move is the only way. Quitting this job will save my life. It is abuse. You never grieved him. It's been 6 months since we made love. Spending a lifetime hating her is no life at all. We keep ourselves shaken up because there are dragons in our center. One night, back when my children were babies, I was reading a book of poetry in the bathtub. I came across a poem called A Secret Life, about deep secrets and how we all have them. I thought, well, I haven't had one since I got sober. I don't keep secrets anymore. That felt good. But then I read, it becomes what you'd most protect if the government said, you can protect one thing, all else is ours. It's what radiates and what can hurt if you get too close to it. I stopped reading and thought, oh, wait. There's one thing I haven't even told my sister. My secret that radiates is that I find women infinitely more compelling and attractive than men. My secret is my suspicion that I was made to make love to a woman and cuddle with a woman and rely on a woman and live and die with a woman. Then I thought, So odd. That cannot be real. You've got a husband and 3 children. Your life is more than good enough. As I climbed out of the tub and shook my hair dry, I told myself, maybe in a different life. Isn't that interesting? As if I had more than one.
Okay, so there you go. She had this epiphany that I don't have any secrets, right? I used to have a secret about my, substance abuse, but I don't have any secrets anymore. That feels good. And in reality, looking deep inside herself, looking inward, she discovered, wait a second, who I am in terms of my sexual attraction and my sexual identity is that I am supposed to be with a woman. And yet I got married and had 3 kids. And then she says, well, maybe in a different life, as though I had another life to live. This is part of that program, that inward knowing. That's who she's supposed to be for herself. That is who she was designed or made to be, and so she wants to live that out. She doesn't like the fact that she has denied who she feels like she's supposed to be on the inside. And that was her secret that she kept. That was her internal dragon. And the point is, again, that you must live according to what the inward person tells you. You must look inside yourself. What are your feelings? What are your emotions? What are your desires? And you are supposed to execute them outwardly. And this is an area in her life where she didn't do that. And so that's something she had to get rid of, which she did later. Let's do imagine. Imagine is really good for, again, what we're talking about here.
All evidence to the contrary, I could imagine myself as Abby's partner. The facts were right there in front of me to see.
So this is when she meets Abby, the woman who would become her future wife after she leaves her husband. And again, this imagine idea ties into the who are you on the inside? Can you picture yourself? Can you see yourself in this way? Again, leaning into all of these right hemisphere ideas. Stop arguing with yourself with the left hemisphere. Instead, just exist in the right hemisphere. Okay, that's the idea.
But the truth was right there inside of me to feel. Swelling, pressing, insisting, there is a life meant for you that is truer than the one you're living. But in order to...
Notice that language, truer, the language of authenticity. We talked about that at the beginning. This is the heartbeat of expressive individualism. Authenticity, truer, be true to yourself. Otherwise, you're lying, right? If you don't live out in the world how you feel on the inside, then you're lying. You need to be authentic. Live truly.
To have it, you will have to forge it yourself. You will have to create on the outside what you are imagining on the inside. Only you can bring it forth, and it will cost you everything. I've learned to live by faith, which does not mean that I live by a set of unwavering beliefs or dogma that men laid down ages ago to keep their power by controlling others.
Notice the narrative that's implicitly embedded into our traditional understanding of faith. She's redefining the language. She's saying this is what faith is. And this is what I do in order to live out what faith is.
My faith has nothing to do with religion anymore. To me, living by faith is allowing the swelling and pressing inside me to direct my outward words and decisions.
Again, that who am I on the inside? I need to express that outwardly. This is the heartbeat of it. You're hearing it in her own language.
Because to me, God is not a being outside of me. God is the fire, the nudge, the warm liquid gold swelling and pressing inside me. In fact, my favorite idea of faith is a belief in the unseen order of things. There are 2 orders of things. There is the seen order unfolding in front of us every day on our streets and in the news. In this visible order, violence reigns and children are shot in their schools and warmongers prosper and 1% of the world hoards half of all we have. We call this order of things reality. This is the way things are. It's all we can see because it's all we've ever seen, yet something inside us rejects it. We know instinctively. This is not the intended order of things. This is not how things are meant to be.
We know instinctively. Notice the language. Intuition. Instinct. Now, again, she's not necessarily wrong about some of these things. When we look out at the world, we do see that there are problems and it ought to be fixed and the world isn't the way it should be, etc. Right? But I would question the fact that this is the solution to those problems.
We know that there is a better, truer, wilder way. That better way is the unseen order inside us. It is the vision we carry in our imagination about a truer, more beautiful world, one in which all children have enough to eat, and we no longer kill each other, and mothers do not have to cross deserts with their babies on their backs. This better idea is what Jews call shalom, Buddhists call nirvana, Christians call heaven, Muslims call salam, and many agnostics call peace.
So notice what we've done. The goal that we're all striving towards, we're trying to achieve heaven, nirvana, shalom, etc. That goal that we're all trying to strive toward, how do you achieve that goal? For Glennon, look inward. Go inside, warm liquid gold, peace inside, etc. Again, it has taken expressive individualism and put it in the realm of religion. It's established that this is the way we ought to exercise a religious frame. And again, she's couching it all in the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is the religious side of the brain. And so that's what she's done. She's picked up all of the cargo of religious ideals and poured them right into this idea of expressive individualism, authenticity.
It is not a place out there, not yet. It's the hopeful swelling in here, pressing through our skin, insisting that it was all meant to be more beautiful than this. And it can be, if we refuse to wait to die and go to heaven, and instead find heaven inside us and give birth to it here and now. If we work to make the vision of the unseen order swelling inside us visible in our lives, homes, and nations, we will make reality more beautiful.
So this is the salvation that expressive individualism has to offer for Glennon Doyle. This is powerful stuff because it's so couched in a religious framework that people begin to see, oh, this is how I can bring about salvation. This is how we can realize the greater way, the better way. This is how we can instantiate the heaven that is inside me out in the world. This is how I do it. I do it by looking inward and expressing my inward feelings, desires, etc. outward. Notice the religiousizing of expressive individualism at its core. Very, very powerful stuff here. Okay, so that was Imagine. That chapter was very good. We could listen to that chapter on and on and on. But we'll stop there just for sake of time. So she went to this speaking engagement, conference type thing, and she ran into this lady named Liz, who was a public speaker there. And Liz is like a spiritual guide or a spiritual coach, right? And she's talking about how struck she was with this speaker named Liz. And again, it all has to do with the expressive individualism looking inward.
Liz put her hand on my arm and said, "Wait, wow. That last thing you said about having to almost die, can you say that again?" I said, "I don't think so. I'm a little nervous. I have no idea what I just said." She smiled and said, "I like you. I like you too." The next night, along with everyone else at the convention, I went to see Liz speak. I got to the event early and claimed a seat in the front, but off to the side, close enough to see her clearly, but not close enough for her to see me clearly. She was standing behind the podium wearing a black shirt with a high white collar, and she reminded me of a priest.
Notice that. She reminded me of a priest. Here is Liz to deliver our religious and spiritual truth. She is going to guide us down the path we need to be going down.
At a pulpit. When she started speaking, I found myself holding my breath. She spoke with gentleness and authority. A man in the front row kept talking to the woman
You remember Jesus? Spoke as a man having authority.
Beside him, and Liz paused mid-sentence, turned to him, and asked him to stop talking. He did. Something about the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, made my heart beat quicker than usual. She seemed certain, steady, free, relaxed. She was not complying and she was not rebelling. She was creating something new. She was original. I wanted to ask, can you say all that again?
She was not complying. She was not rebelling. She was original. Again, the expressive individual. She didn't get her ideas from others. Instead, she originally generated her ideas from herself. And there's this joke she uses when she was having a conversation with her earlier. I opened with it. Liz turned to her and say, "Can you say that again?" And she goes, "No, I'm nervous. I can't remember what I said." Well, now she's watching her, Liz, give the presentation, and she's original. Can you say that again? Right? Now, I think there's something good here. This originality idea. It's something we want to see, right? I've talked about this before, how I made a transition in my own ministry from being a parrot, essentially just parroting all of my favorite preachers and authors and teachers and theologians, to actively thinking for myself and engaging. So there's something compelling about that. There's something encouraging about that. Now, I'll be the first to admit, it might be because I breathe the air of authenticity, of expressive individualism. But it was important for me in my life to move from the idea of being a parrot to speaking for myself. Okay? But I didn't have to abandon my Christian framework in order to do it. However, for Glennon, the key thing that is attractive for her to Liz is the fact that Liz is original, is the fact that she isn't a parrot. Expressive individualism, again, at its core. Okay, let's go to Levels, which is the last chapter of the book before the epilogue. And she kind of gives this illustration. And so we're going to listen through Levels, and then I want to play Attendance for you, because I think in Attendance, she tips her hand a little bit to reveal something that I think cuts against her own ideas, against her own philosophy of life. Okay, I need to give you the background to this one, because she's going to end the chapter with a quote that won't make sense unless you know the background. Her friend told her how she went to a spin class, and the training instructor said, "Nobody leave this room. Don't leave the room to go to the bathroom. We're going to do a hard workout and nobody leave." Okay? And the woman talks about the fact how she wasn't prepared for such an intense spin class, but because she was told up front, "Don't leave the room," she didn't leave. And she nearly threw up and passed out after the class, right? And then reflecting on it later, she goes, "I don't know why I didn't just leave. The doors weren't even locked," right? But just the instructor telling her don't leave was enough for her to not want to leave. Again, do you see the framework? You're a cheetah stuck behind the fences. They're keeping you in. You need to break out, right? Why are you just listening to this authority figure? The doors aren't even locked. That's the idea. So I'm going to play this last chapter for you, just a minute or two of it, and you can kind of see her final call. This is right before the epilogue, her final call to be an expressive individual.
Just like I stayed in my pain and shame until I knew. And now, I know. I'm sitting on my couch between two friends, sipping coffee. My dog's asleep in my friend Saskia's lap. We're all listening to Ashley tell her story about staying in the hot yoga room until it made her sick. After she says, the door wasn't even locked. The room falls quiet. Ashley has said something important. Saskia rubs the dog's head. Karen squints her eyes. I think this. The truth of my 30s was, stay on your mat, Glennon. The staying is making you. The truth of my 40s is, I'm made. I will not stay, not ever again, in a room or conversation or relationship or institution that requires me to abandon myself. When my body tells me the truth, I'll believe it. I trust myself now, so I will no longer suffer voluntarily or silently or for long. I'll look at those women to my left and right, who must stay, because it's that time for them, because they have to know what love and God and freedom are not before they can know what love and God and freedom are. Because they want to know, because they are warriors. I'll send them every bit of my strength and solidarity to help them through this part. And then I'll pick up my mat and slowly, deliberately, lightly walk out. Because I have just remembered that the sun is shining, the breeze is cool, and these doors, they're not even locked.
There you go. That's the final chapter of the book. I am no longer going to stay stuck in this yoga room. I said spin class, but it was a yoga class. Sorry. I am no longer going to stay in here. The doors aren't even locked. And she applies that to her life. I am going to be authentic to the core. I will no longer stay in a relationship, a conversation, in a class, in any situation where I am told to not be authentic. If they are requiring me to be inauthentic, I'm out. I'm going to pick up my mat. I'm going to leave. The wind is blowing. The sun is shining. These doors aren't even locked. And there it is. That is the conclusion of Untamed. That is the conclusion of expressive individualism. That is the conclusion of authenticity. Okay? Now, there's one chapter where she betrays a different perspective. It's called attendance. And I think this is extremely fascinating because in this chapter, I was struck by the fact that she ends up concluding something that is very, very different than all of this authenticity, expressive individualism, etc., that we've been told the whole book. She does something very different in this one chapter, and I think it betrays the fact that the system she's promoting at its core doesn't work, at least not entirely. And this chapter is called Attendance. Let's listen to what she has to say, and I want to listen to this chapter in full. It's only a few minutes, but listen to what she has to say, and I'm going to give my closing comments about expressive individualism. Again, this is part one. We're just looking at the whole look inward, look inward, look inward, look inward idea, okay? In the next part, we're going to look at the don't let institutions tell you who to be, don't let institutions tell you what to do part of it, okay? But let's listen to this whole chapter and see what she has to say about this idea.
Attendance. One morning, in the middle of the divorce, I called Liz to ask for parenting advice. Liz doesn't have children, so she is still sane enough to have perspective. I said, I know that all is well and everything is fine at the deepest level and all that. I know all of that, but I don't know it today. I'm worried that I ruined them. They're confused and afraid, and for Christ's sake, this is the one thing I swore I'd never do to them. She said, Okay, Glennon, here is what I see happening. Your family is together on an airplane right now. You are the flight attendant, and the kids are passengers on their first flight. The plane just hit some serious turbulence, and the airplane is bouncing. Yes, I said, that sounds about right. Okay, what do passengers do when turbulence hits? They look at the flight attendant. If the flight attendant appears to be panicked, the passengers panic. If the flight attendants are calm and steady, the passengers feel safe and follow suit. Glennon, you've been flying and living long enough to know that while turbulence feels scary, it won't take the plane down. Turbulence isn't deadly, and neither is divorce. We survive these things. The kids don't know this yet, so they are afraid. They are going to keep looking at your face for information. Your job right now is to smile at them, stay calm, and keep serving the freaking peanuts.
Listen to that. Your job right now in this relationship is to keep smiling, stay strong, and keep serving peanuts, even if you don't feel it. Guys, that sounds rather inauthentic to me. That sounds like not looking inward and expressing your feelings outwardly. That sounds like you're putting up a face because it's what's expected of you. Wait a second here. I have gone through chapter after chapter after chapter telling me to look inward, discover who I am, and to express that outwardly. And anyone who doesn't like it can take a hike. And yet here in this moment of being a parent in a struggle, a tough situation, the advice she gets is be inauthentic. Put on a smile, put on a face, because that's what's needed right now. So you do what is needed. Listen to how she responds to this advice.
This is what I told myself every single day during the divorce and a million times since. Keep serving the freaking peanuts, Glennon. I was talking to a friend about this parenting mantra, and she said, yes, turbulence doesn't take planes down, but planes do crash. What if the thing that's shaking your family's plane is real? What if your family actually is going down? A friend of a friend found out a year ago that her teenage daughter was dying of cancer. That's not turbulence. That's the crash we all fear. That's a family going down with the full knowledge that they won't all make it out alive. This woman started drinking and drugging, and she didn't stop, so her daughter died while she was high. Her other two daughters watched their sister die without their mama present because she had jumped ship. I think about this mother every day. I feel deep empathy for her. I also feel afraid for her. I fear that one day she will finally get still, and that stillness will be so full of scalding regret that it will be impossible to stay. We don't control the turbulence or tragedy that happens to our families. The plot of our lives is largely out of our control. We decide only the response of the main character. We decide whether we will be the one who jumps ship or the one who stays and leads. Parenthood is serving the peanuts amid turbulence. Then, when real trouble hits, when life brings our family death, divorce, bankruptcy, illness, parenthood is looking at little faces and knowing that we are as afraid as they are. Parenthood is thinking, this is too much. I cannot lead them, but I will do the thing I cannot do. So we sit down next to our babies. We turn their faces toward ours until they are looking away from the chaos and directly into our eyes. We take their hands in ours. We say to them, look at me. It's you and me. I am here. This is more real than anything out there. You and me. We will hold hands and breathe and love each other, even if we are falling from the sky. Family is, whether we're falling or flying, we're going to take care of each other through the whole ride.
There you go. So, this is how I want to wrap up the study. Now, I'm not mad at Glennon for being willing to sacrifice her authenticity for the sake of her family. I'm not mad at her for that. I think she did the right thing by trying to be there for her children and put up a strong front, keep serving the peanuts, as she said, even though she felt terrible inside. So I have no problems with that. But here's where I'm going with this. I think her fundamental framework that she explicitly says doesn't work. If you have to act contrary to your mantra, then it doesn't cover everything. It doesn't actually do everything. And if there are situations in your life, say parenting in your family through turbulence, if there are situations in your life where you need to sacrifice your authenticity in order to serve a higher or greater good, in order to serve some sort of virtue that goes above and beyond yourself, if that can happen in this area of your life, why not other areas? If that can happen in this area of your life, why not your sexuality? If that can happen in this area of your life, why not in a situation where you are trying to decide amongst friends whether or not we are hungry? She spends the whole book coming down hard on people who go against their authenticity. But when push comes to shove, she gets put in a very hard situation and she lives inauthentically. Why? For virtue's sake. But the fact of the matter is that there are other areas in which virtue could trump your personal authenticity. And that's really the point here. Expressive individualism doesn't work all the way down. Authenticity might work to a degree. It might be important to a point, but if you try to push it all the way down, it doesn't work because you end up living your life completely selfishly. If you pushed authenticity all the way to its logical conclusion, you're only going to live for yourself. You're only going to do what's happy because, after all, nobody can tell you who to be. Nobody can tell you what to do. Nobody can tell you how to live your life. In and out of relationships willy-nilly, nothing is going to impose itself on you and force you to conform to its image because that would be inauthentic after all. But that doesn't really work. We see people like that in life and we look at them and say, that isn't good. We look at people who live their lives that way and we call them selfish. And we recognize that doesn't work. Now, here's my point. I don't think Glennon is that way. I don't think she is completely 100% selfish across the board. But it's at that point that she is living contrary to her worldview. She is living contrary to her perspective. When push came to shove in her family situation, she did something incredibly inauthentic. And who is she to point the finger at somebody else who sacrifices their sexuality for a higher good or a greater virtue for family? Well, you're being inauthentic. So are you. Just at a different level. And so, I don't think if you push expressive individualism all the way down, it works. Instead, all of us live with some amount of expressive individualism, some amount of authenticity, and some amount of sacrifice, some amount of living for something higher than ourselves, some amount of virtue. In the final analysis, authenticity and sacrifice need to come together. And if you push this idea of expressive individualism too far, you lose sacrifice, you lose virtue. It doesn't work. Glennon practically lives her life holding authenticity and sacrifice in some sort of tension. But she preaches with her words, authenticity, 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 don't sacrifice for anyone. But we know she doesn't live that way. We know that doesn't work all the way down. And that is where we, even for the people who most want to promote expressive individualism, that in the final analysis is where we land at. You need to have some sort of tension between the two. And now we're just arguing about a matter of degrees. She has set up the framework of the book as do this, don't do that. In reality, we're all experiencing some amount of authenticity mixed with some amount of sacrifice. And again, we're just shifting the line a little bit. Our worldview says a little less authenticity, a little more sacrifice. Her worldview says a little more authenticity, a little less sacrifice. But don't sit here and pretend that it is a massive difference in worldview, because it's just a matter of degrees. It's just a matter of perspective. Okay? Again, practically, she lives her life contrary to this mantra she keeps repeating. So, that's my critique, my first half of the critique of this expressive individualism idea. Now, I want you to know, I didn't land on this conclusion of expressive individualism bad, authenticity evil, stay away from it. I'm with Truman. What did Truman say? I want to read this again. I think it's important. There is a tendency among social conservatives to blame expressive individualism for the problems that they regard as currently putting a strain on the liberal Western order, particularly as it manifests itself in the chaos of identity politics. And I hear this. This is the current critiques I hear. If you listen to Ben Shapiro, he's constantly talking down to people who have an expressive individualistic framework. He will constantly say things like, this is what you get when you have a society full of expressive individuals. You're an expressive individual, Ben. So you can't escape that. The answer, I don't think, guys, this is my opinion and my perspective, the answer isn't no authenticity. The answer isn't all sacrifice, no expressive individualism. I don't think that's the answer. But I do think that the framework that Glennon is pushing is going too far, right? What does he say? The difficulty with this claim is that expressive individualism is something that affects us all. It is the very essence of the culture of which we are all a part. To put it bluntly, we're all expressive individuals now. So I believe that. I agree with that. So what are we arguing about then? What we're arguing about is how much authenticity holds more weight than sacrifice. We're arguing about how much virtue we are willing to throw out the door in favor of expressive individualism. That's where the issue lies. The answer is not, my opinion, the answer is not all expressive individualism is bad, let's get rid of it. The answer instead is how much sacrifice and how much virtue are we willing to get rid of in favor of expressive individualism and authenticity? And for me, I think the culture and society has pushed that envelope way too far. And so that's where we are having the discussion. That's where the issue lies. Thank you so much for watching that video all the way to the end. It really helps out this channel. I hope it provided some value to you. Other ways you can support what we do here is to click the subscribe button below or hit the notification button. If you want to support us financially, you can do so by finding our link to our Patreon in the description below. Every dollar goes towards helping grow this ministry and is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for supporting us in any way that you can. Take care. God bless. Bye now.